hope that doesn't interfere with some of the visibility of it. For those of you who might have done my crypto class a couple of years ago, I wanted to emphasize this is not part, and for those who did not, I should say, this is not part two, okay, of that. That's because in some ways, I don't even think it needs a part two because, since that last class, there's lots of wacky stuff has been happening, and there's been lots of changes with respect to the whole crypto ecosystem, and certainly lots of news that people have had with respect to that. And I try to make a little list since the last class, what sort of it covered in the agenda of the last class. I think when we had that class, we were only starting to see a little bit of activity about NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And now, of course, it's a lot more, I wouldn't say it's more mature, but more people are using it than they were at that time. And no one actually ever did, I think, in that last class, talk about ETFs, exchange trading funds. And so we've got that to cover. And then, of course, the news, you've got this whole deal with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, which certainly, I think, in some ways is going to influence people's opinions about crypto. And I want to try to emphasize that it shouldn't. But I am going to have to explain that statement in that case. Another thing that has happened is China, in terms of the geopolitics, China has shut down crypto trading and banking. And if you remember when we last had the class, the large majority of crypto mining was happening in China. And so that totally got switched around in some way since the last time. The government's getting serious about regulation, maybe as serious as the government can get. How serious a bunch of senior citizens can understand, as it were, how to regulate cryptocurrency. You also may remember that, some of the downsides that we talked about the last time, and people still think about crypto in terms of this, is the demand that mining causes on resources, primarily electricity. You hear a lot of horror stories with respect to that. And there have been, and certainly it was at that particular point, is that if that was an issue that was not some way addressed, then the whole crypto system did not have a very bright future. So there's more stuff about altcoins and stable coins. And I say that Satoshi Nakamoto is still missing in action. And if you don't get that little joke, you will in just a second. Anyway, there is so much more. There's so much that has happened since that last class. But as I say, this isn't part two. So we are going to cover the fundamentals and sort of then bring it up. But we're going to have a lot more, as it were, to talk about, in the later parts of the class to sort of bring that up. Okay. In terms of administration, I have a policy then is all my slides are available to you, online, and they're dense. And part of the rationale for putting all this stuff online is so you don't try to take notes in class, that you pay attention, you ask questions, and those kinds of things, and not try to keep up with it in that sense. And so they're all online, and you're free to do, they're under Creative Commons, so you're free to do whatever you want to with them, except sell them. That's not my restriction. That's what Creative Commons means. And I'd appreciate ongoing comments. You can share them, whatever. Okay, so, and that's what I just said right there. I also want to comment too on the notion that if I start getting too technical or go too fast, please let me know, especially for the people that are online. If I get to the point where I don't seem to be responding to questions or whatever that are coming from the people who are watching this on Zoom, please let me know, because it's not my intention to do it. As I said before, topics are a moving target, because whenever I've done this class in the past, invariably in the 8-week period that we've had it, there's been something really cool or dramatic that happened. And so that I didn't plan for. And so I'm going to have to adjust to that as the class goes on. That's what I mean by that. And of course, if you see things, if you read stories, please bring them to the attention of the class, so that we can all learn from what your experience is. Yes, sir.
Can you put up that slide again that has the address for you?
Sure.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
And actually, I should mention, I try to keep this up to date, and if you go to this URL right now, today's slides are on there. That doesn't mean you can leave now. Okay. Okay. And as I said, the main thing I want to do is that I want to have fun. I want us to enjoy ourselves and learn some things from each other, to get challenged, etc. And, I think we're all going to come away with the notion too that, cryptocurrency isn't for everybody in terms of being a user. However, I think cryptocurrency is for anybody in the sense that you should have some idea about what it is and how it's currently affecting such things as international politics, finance, etc. Okay, certainly not going to try to convince anybody to buy crypto. Okay, so I say, please ask questions. Just don't let me drone on, which for those of you who know me know I'm perfectly capable of doing quite well. Okay, so don't let me drone on. We can use chat on Zoom for those that are online, email, after class, at the breaks, anytime. Let's take advantage of any of the communication channels that we can. And that's why I have this cartoon. I don't want any, hopefully no one's going to fall asleep, in this class, even with my droning in that sense. All right. So, any questions or comments sort of about the administrative element? Okay. Now, sort of a kickoff here. Something certainly there's a broad range of knowledge that people have about the topic. So, I would say here, and you don't have to raise your hand or anything on this one. How many people, or you can ask yourself, how many people believe that cryptocurrency is a scam, a pyramid scheme, or is currently in a bubble? Okay. Oh, okay. You are being.
I'm willing to be converted.
Okay. No, because that is certainly a perception. That is certainly a perception. I got to work on you. Actually, I got to be careful, because if I say I have to work on him, then that suggests that I don't agree with that. Okay. Oops. How many people here believe that cryptocurrency is nothing but a good domain for speculators, scammers, terrorists, criminals, doomsday preppers, ones that are thinking for Armageddon, or just people that are just so incredibly pessimistic about the whole financial future of the world? Oh, you're in. I'm not going to ask you which one of those categories. Any of them? All of them? Uh-oh, I just lost my mic. Okay. That's what happens when I start waving my hands around. Oh, oh no. Yes. Oh, remote. I don't know who that is. But my guess is.
We can hear you perfectly, Professor.
Oh, you can't. That's because actually my microphone fell off.
No, we can. Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my microphone did fall off.
Yes, I did see
That
that.
might
But
have
you
been
okay
part of it.
now? Yeah.
Okay. So someone did fall in that category. And as I say, I'm not going to ask you which one. Okay. How many people believe that crypto is just a passing fad for geeks, for techies? That you've got technical people who are trying to come up with a solution for which there is no problem. But they think the technology can make things better. A lot of people feel that way. How many people believe that cryptocurrency is something that you could never understand, trust, and much less never use? You're in perfectly good company if you say yes on that one too. And lastly, in this sort of list, you know, how many people believe that cryptocurrency is dead? You know, that it was a fun thing to talk about. All right, by the end of this course, I suspect you're going to know my opinion on these. But I'm not going to in any way try to change your opinion. Just going to try to really explain perhaps why these attitudes, you know, might be somewhat prevalent. Oh gosh. Speaking of technology. Okay, so well, that's not.
Dutton has control.
Yeah.
All right. Dawa or whatever, if you can hear me, I am frozen.
I'm on my way.
Okay, I seem to be frozen both on the keyboard and the remote. Yes.
You could ask Dorothea to switch to the next slide.
Oh, that's okay. Yes.
Why isn't banking using cryptocurrency?
Why?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that. And that's because why does banking use anything? Because it makes it easier. And they may not be willing to admit that. Okay. And one example sort of tease you about with respect to that, they use it because transfers can be more efficiently done and tracked using crypto, but we're going to get to that. Okay, there we go. Who likes crypto perhaps? Well, lawyers. Consider this. I mean, like bankruptcy lawyers and all those guys, you know, you can think that they might like crypto because they could be making a lot of money. They don't want to see it go away. And they can make up the rules as they go along. And that's not intended to offend any lawyers that might be in here in that case. But there are people who are viewing the topic for a lot of different reasons. Okay, so I want to introduce our first little, you know, mnemonic, and that is FUD. If you get anything from today's class, you'll know what FUD means. Okay, it means fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And anyway, this is from an article that was in the New York Times recently. And it's talking about it because of what is perceived by the crypto community as being a whirlwind of anti-crypto news, data, and online evangelists chatter that evangelists deride as propaganda spread by enemies of the new financial order. Wow. The new financial order really coming with that. So that's FUD. So in recent years, I say it's become part of the vocabulary for cryptocurrency. And if you're a big advocate of this, then saying, I ignore FUD, that means that you're cool, you're with it. You know, it's a badge of honor because it shows your commitment to the whole idea of cryptocurrency and the impact that it can have. All right, so the founder of Binance, who was a large coin exchange, you know, wrote in this article too, there is no need to FUD. That's the quote for today. But you know, it's possible FUD might show up in a crossword puzzle sometime. That would be pretty easy. Okay, so why, in my opinion, I'm a fudder. Why, in my opinion, is cryptocurrency still relevant and still important? Because even at the highest level, I think that it continues to address very fundamental questions. You might think yourself when you see these, duh, isn't this obvious? About what is money? And what is the role of money? Why do we have money? I mean, you always took that for granted, but I would contend that with the whole topic of crypto, you think a little bit more about that. And are the old concepts of money and how to use it, are they outdated? Do they need, to be modified? And in addition to money, you can ask the question, what is value? What does that mean? And how do you acquire value? How do you maintain value? How do you protect value, etc.? As I said, the whole topic about cryptocurrency causes a revisiting of these sort of fundamental, almost philosophical ideas. The other thing, which I say, once again, in my opinion, and I'm losing my mic again. I might have to start using the handheld mic. Can I just use the handheld mic?
Let's try this one,
Okay.
one last time.
Probably my big head, though.
No, you're fine.
Okay,
It goes right here.
all right. I say that it's still relevant because it is tied to the network. And we are certainly a network society. There's no getting around that. It is tied to digital technology, and all of us are major users of digital technology. Even if you're a prepper, you probably still want to go for digital technology, and it closely is tied to that. There is no doubt, too, that crypto affects, and we're going to see instances where, and shapes some of the global financial markets and the whole technology that's used there. It has become a national and geopolitical issue in terms of issues such as regulations. And this is one that you don't necessarily hear so much about, and we're going to go into this some in depth there, is that it continues, in my mind, to provide options that didn't exist before for what is referred to as financial empowerment. And what do I mean by that in a nutshell right now is a huge percentage of the people on earth do not have access to financial institutions. They can't get bank accounts for one reason or another. They can't get loans for one reason or another. And we're going to see how cryptocurrency can help address, I didn't say solve, but help address that problem. So my goal for this course is to help you appreciate why crypto is special, why it's revolutionary, and why it's disruptive. And there's never been anything like it before. And to understand what crypto and blockchain, which is a closely tied technology, to understand what the whole conversation is about, both on the bright side and on the dark side. And we're going to have some interesting, challenging mental exercises to make you think about some of these kinds of issues. So it is also my goal in the sense is that you're going to come away from this course with a vocabulary and a knowledge of some of the fundamental concepts so that when you read a story, when you hear a pundit, when you're involved in a conversation with someone about it, that you're going to have, a leg up on understanding exactly, whether or not it's valid, or being able to evaluate what is said in a far more intelligent way. But as I said before, it is certainly not my goal to try to convince anybody in here to buy. Okay? But don't ask me questions about that. Okay. So, for example, I said that it seems that always something happens during the course of the class. When I've been doing it. Next month, Sam Bankman-Fried goes on trial during this class. And you can be sure it is going to be covered extensively. And you can be sure that when that coverage happens, you're going to get a lot of people offering a lot of opinions about cryptocurrency, or how he was able to do what he did, or something of that nature. And I hope that by that time we can say that, hey, you will have a better understanding of that. And by the same token, if you see a headline like this, Fed issues serious $120 billion crypto warning as price death cross. What the hell is that about? It looks like it's something that's supposed to scare you. And you're going to say, well, is this just trying to sell news stories, et cetera? What does that mean? What does that even mean? I'm not saying I know exactly what it means. And I wonder whether or not the person who wrote that story really knows what it means. But we will, in fact, be able to examine issues such as this. Or in this case, already the IRS is proposing cryptocurrency regulations for brokers. I mean, for example, now that you're supposed to report to the IRS any gains that you get from cryptocurrency. That's on your tax. But you have to ask the question, a significant portion of the US Congress is over 80 years old. Did they really get it? Anyway, hope that's me. So what we're going to have, for these next 8 weeks is that we're going to have what I would refer to as a trend-driven agenda. And that's why I say we're here. And what do I mean by that? I think there's at least 7 trends. Here we go again. Oh boy. Actually, that might work. We'll see. There are 7 trends that are influencing cryptocurrency space right now, and I'm going to try to get some good case studies and examples of them. One is regulation. We mentioned that. ETFs, that's something that's in the progress. We mentioned that. What's the future of NFTs, which I say we did not have in that first class? There's also clearly going to be the ongoing topic about crypto crime. And what are the development of corporate adoption? What's happening in terms of the corporate space for their attitudes as far as cryptocurrency? And smart contracts and financial technology, asking in that particular case. Cryptocurrency and green energy technologies. We got to talk about that because we have to talk about the resource usage question. Okay? Now, I give you this list of things that we're going to talk about in terms of trends in cryptocurrency, and I haven't even attempted to give a definition of what cryptocurrency even is. So that's why I say we really have to sort of start back. But we also ask the question about what's the world going to look like when cryptocurrency joins forces with artificial intelligence? When quantum computing becomes widely available? And when you've got what's called Web 3.0, which is and the blockchain. And what's going to happen, I mentioned about our access to technology, what's going to happen when we have new technologies? You know, our phones are different. Our laptops are different. Our TVs are different. Our cars are different. How is that going to mesh with these ideas about cryptocurrency? Okay. So many angles that I want to do. So quickly, I'm going to say I want to talk about a brief history of money, what cryptocurrency is about, what blockchain's about, what's the crypto, why is it called cryptocurrency? How does it work? Getting involved, different flavors, crypto economics, ICOs, initial coin offerings. You don't know what that means, we'll get to it. Cryptocurrency for social benefit, and what is the future? So there's no shortage of topics. And so here's a few of the other ones, what we'll see in that case. Okay. So the fundamental question we say when I ask these, are you out of the bus? Or are you under the bus when it comes to crypto? Okay. Are you part of the environment, or at least understanding of it? Or are you just wishing it would go away and don't think it's going to affect you? But I can say from the start, though, it's real. And this is, you know, basically for the last several years. And you can see that the capitalization of cryptocurrency, you know, looking at the period sort of the middle to the end of 2001, had a $3 trillion capitalization, which is approximately twice that of Google. It's dropped off since then. But if it has that much capitalization, it's real. That's real money in that sense. And if you look too at crypto wealth, you know, what the impact has been, you know, there are totally over 88,000 millionaires whose wealth is based on crypto. Likewise, 22 billionaires whose wealth is based on crypto. So I think you could see in that case that makes an argument in the sense of saying, whatever this is, it's to be taken seriously. Okay, and as I said before, not only, we're not going to get into economics. I'm no economist, but one reason I love this particular topic is, as I say, it's fun. It's a mystery, intrigue, money, math, and hope with unknown and mysterious characters. The internet, including the dark internet, hackers, anarchists, whack jobs, people who love money and trust mathematics and technology, idealistic academics who think they have the questions, venture capitalists, the global financial system with wheelers and dealers, a media anxious for stories, and a serious attempt to make a new financial order. So look at that cast of characters. God, that's a great cast of characters. That's everything. Okay.
What about psychiatrists?
That could be, I'll add that to the. Okay. All right. So first off, then let's come up with a definition. So long to do that. Okay. So when I use the term cryptocurrency, I say that it is any form of currency. And we'll say what that means, which means it's something that you can exchange for something else, or it's something that you can use to retain value, that exists only digitally. That means virtually. That means it's not based on any tangible resource like gold, silver, pork bellies, or anything of that nature. And it has no central or regulating authority, such as a government or a bank, but instead uses what's referred to as a decentralized ledger to record transactions and to issue new currency, and relies upon cryptography. That's where the crypto comes from, to prevent well-known financial issues such as counterfeiting, fraudulent transactions, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into that in more depth, but at a simplest level, the notion too is that the goal is that cryptocurrency transactions should be anonymous, just like cash, right? I give you $20. Don't expect it, Dad. I give you $20. There's no record of it. Totally anonymous. Okay? And shouldn't digital currency be the same way? Okay? Isn't anonymity an important thing to do? And so for some people, what about the anonymity of hiding your money under your mattress? Because you don't want somebody or some agency to know what you've got. That's anonymity. And I say it is represented by entries in a shared global ledger that no one can modify. Okay, and I'll go more into that in just an example. And certainly when you talk about crypto, that means Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ether, and the whole list of hundreds of the guys. Okay, so here's a quick and dirty, simple definition. Now, I say here at the beginning, networks make this possible. And that's because we live in a digital network society. And so the notion too, here's your first little mental exercise. Of these three types of networks, which one can you identify possible points of failure in?
2.
1 and 2.
1 and 2. Right. In the case of the first one, which is sort of a star network, if the central node of that network goes down, you're toast. No node can communicate with each other. Right? The second one's the same thing, except for the fact that, okay, instead of these simple nodes that are coming from the central node, you've got subnetworks, but it still has the comparable points of failure. When I say points of failure, I think things that would prevent people from taking a path from any one of these nodes, any one of these points to another one. Anything that would prevent that from happening. What about this last one? There is no single path that you have to take in order to go from one node or one point to another. And between these two, what does that mean? What's a term I used a few minutes ago? It's decentralized. There is no central point of failure. This makes This makes it possible. Okay, so I have to give a definition of blockchain. And so think about blockchain as simply being a very rudimentary database, not owned by Oracle or not owned by Microsoft, something that anyone can use and understand, like a spreadsheet. Okay? But what's different in this case, it's a ledger that shows the transactions involved with cryptocurrency, and it can be shared all over the world. Anybody can see it. Okay? Well, if you say anybody can see it, isn't that going to suggest that anybody can change it? Anybody can hack it? That's where the crypto comes in. Yes, sir.
All right, so how does that relate to this anonymity? So what's a ledger?
We're not talking anonymity yet. We're going to get to that.
A ledger has got to identify
Ah,
the beginning and end of a transaction.
it's because in the case of anonymity, your name is not in that ledger.
What's an example of an entry in this ledger?
I'm going to show you an example. I'll show you an example of that kind of ledger. Okay, so anyway, so the links I say in this ledger, let me say here, are cryptographically generated, and I'll say what that means. But it basically, the bottom line means that it can't be tampered with. It can't be modified. Okay, you're going to see other. Okay, so here's a simple example. Here's a simple example of what it looks like as a database that you can get, is that think about something like your checkbook or a simple ledger. And so you've got a beginning, you've got entries, and you've got an end. Null means it just points nowhere. That's the last entry in your checkbook registry, if anybody uses checks anymore. Okay. But there's also something that's associated with each one of those entries that tells you how to get to the next one. That could be a physical orientation, or it could be a date or something of that nature. So this is a very simple ledger. All right. Now, I draw the parallel with your checkbook registry. That's probably not something that you're going to want to share with the world, maybe. But, you have to think too about the fact is that it's about as simple a construct for understanding their relationships. And you look at your ledger in the sense, well, whether or not you make a deposit and you're overdrawn or something of that nature. Okay. So a simple analogy that I'll use, now, not with your checkbook, is having to do with real estate. Okay. Now, if you go down to the assessor's office at City Hall, who keeps track of the deeds, then the ownership of a property is in fact going to be defined by a chain of the people that have owned that house, or that title, a chain of title. And so it's a sequence of deeds that goes from the original owner to the current owner. Okay? And so you establish who the owner is by just simply going through that sequence of that chain to find out who the current owner is. All right? And anytime there's a sale, you just replace who I saw null on the other, just add it to the end of that chain. It's time sequence in that sense. Now, what happens in the case of the assessor's office? What happens if that registry is destroyed? And actually, I know this problem because I trace in the history of my house, which was built before the earthquake. And there's this big gap in there because City Hall burned to the ground. And all those records were lost in that case. That's a problem in terms of trying to establish the legitimacy, as it were, of that chain of title. Now, suppose there had been copies of this distributed everywhere, all over the world. Suppose the assessor's office knew there was the possibility of calamity and made a lot of copies of it. Well, that's a good idea. But how are you going to know which copy's the right copy? You know, if they get changed. Or how are you going to know when somebody adds another property to one of them that gets added on all the other ones? No one's tampered with it. That's probably why they never did this. Because it seemed to introduce a problem, you know, that couldn't be resolved. Now, the other thing you'd say about in terms of my real estate, double selling and ownership is prevented by timestamps. So in other words, you know, somebody couldn't come and say, hey, you don't own your house, I own your house. Well, when was it entered in the ledger? Right. Okay, so looks like something like this. Right? A is the original owner, sells to B, B sells to K, and the last entry is the present owner. Perfectly simple. Right? Well, let's replicate this for financial transactions. Okay. So as I said, suppose all these deeds and the ledger were made available to thousands of these nodes on this network that can communicate with each other. And that would mean that if someone is going to try to cheat, they're going to have to change all the copies everywhere. They're going to have to figure out where the copies are and change them. That's a monumental task. Okay? And so if all the deeds are genuine and everyone agrees on the chain of title, then we can tell who owns the property. All right? Anyway, this is the concept that we have in terms of saying it's not centralized. The point of failure being the fact that the assessor's office can burn to the ground does not exist. Okay? Make sense? All right. Now, a little digression here. The Contemporary Jewish Museum currently has an exhibit called Spaghetti Blockchain. And I looked at this and I have absolutely no idea why that uses the term blockchain. So if any of you have been to this exhibit or are going to this exhibit, please explain it to me. Because the point being too is that this distributed ledger concept, and this blockchain concept is going to be a critical part of our discussion. And it's also not only related to cryptocurrency, but is going to be related to a lot of other future technologies. Okay. So now let's think about this network that we've got, and let's think about it being a platform. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean in a sense? For those of you, you know, what's the difference between the World Wide Web and the internet? Some people think they're exactly the same. But they're not, because the World Wide Web is an application that runs on the internet, that is built for the internet, along with email and all these other things. Okay? But it basically says if you have a network that has protocols about how you can build an application that sits on top of it and takes advantage of it. And that's exactly what we're saying here, is that if you have this decentralized network that we talked about, then one of the applications you can build on top of it is cryptocurrency. Make sense? everyone awake? Yes, sir.
How do you identify a bad actor in this network?
Absolutely. We're gonna get to that. I promise you. Yes, this is any of these kinds of things certainly is going to be the complete death knell for this system. And can you be absolutely sure that, people who don't FUD, welcoming any opportunities to find weaknesses in this network that can discount, as it were, its viability? Yes, that's an excellent question.
I was thinking of, let's say, going to the source of the computer, the signature on the very computer of the user who's doing an attempt of crime, trying to get money out of me. And finding a way to do that.
But that's perfect. You gotta see it, but that can be spoofed. That can be spoofed. I mean, like, you can change your computer address, your IP address. Same way you can, send mail and somebody thinks that it's you, or somebody else can send mail. So all of these things can be spoofed. And if there's anything that really motivates someone to go against spoofing, it's something that involves money to find a solution for, right? Yes. Now you had
I was curious about why, in the real estate example applying here, why you can't just back it up to off-site. You wouldn't have had the earthquake. The earthquake that happened last year as opposed to 1906. Most systems, most data would have been backed up to multiple remote.
well, that's a great question, in the sense of saying, how much does that, do you think that the assessors in 1906 in the assessor's office someone ever thought, let's make extra copies just in case?
But now
That would have certainly helped. But I can tell you too, from my experience, it probably wouldn't have then, because all that stuff was handwritten. And this is going to be like the monks copying documents by hand, and nobody in City Hall was willing to do that. But now the technology is trivial for doing that. You're exactly right. And we'll see how that relates. Okay. So here's a couple of quotes. I love quotes in my classes. Cryptocurrency, if you want a definition, is everything that you don't understand about money combined with everything that you don't understand about computers, which means you're stuck, right? But he's a comedian, but he's also a pundit. So he has reasons for saying things like this. But instead, here's a quote from David Harvey, City University of New York, who's an anthropologist. He's not a techie in that sense, where he says, we can best interpret the different forms money takes, the money commodity, coin, convertible, inconvertible, paper, etc., as an outcome of the drive, and say here, basic human drive to perfect money as a frictionless, costless, instantaneously adjustable lubricant of exchange, while preserving the quality as a measure of value. This is what he contends mankind has been trying to do ever since we tried to exchange things. People thought that was okay when you used beads or seashells. Come up with something that really, frictionless is a key word there. No obstacles to it. Okay, so is cryptocurrency really money? Well, this is from the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. He says, no conclusion. Know that people were also skeptical when paper money displaced gold. Right? What is this paper? I want the real stuff in that sense. Or once the dollar was taken off the gold standard by the Nixon administration, the door was open to all forms of electronic money. There is nothing physical backing up banknotes. Okay. In the same sense is that you walk into your local bank. How do they know what your bank account is? It's all electronic. It's all digital. You want to say, for some of you in this class, you say, I want $25,000 in cash. They say, what? We don't have that in our bank. You think, why not? You're a bank, aren't you? We get it for you a couple of days. We talk to the other branches and bring it all together. So we're already not talking about real money the way they used to be. Or you look back, silver certificates. You could walk into a bank and say, hey, I want $10 worth of silver. I don't know who ever tried that, but now they're going to look at you like you just fell off of a wagon outside the bank. Okay. So it has changed. So why can it not continue to change? Is crypto really money? So here's this. Cryptocurrency is a tradable entity whose value is based on faith backed by nothing. We just call that currency. Backed by your faith in the United States government. That's why doomsday preppers. Okay. So let's do a really, really quick and simple, before we take our break, history of money. This might, you'll see this when you see the slides. Okay, so what's money? I say it's a system of value so that people could get things that they wanted for services, etc. And that had to be some rules surrounding how it could be used. And as long as everyone played by the rules and recognized it, that was fine. It worked. You think about it on the fringes. How well did it work on the fringes when you had societies that were meeting each other who didn't have the same systems? Okay. And these rules are subject to change. But it also, what's money is something that allows you to accumulate wealth and save it. Okay. And so it allowed strangers to transact without the need to trust each other because they trust the money. You say this because I know him, I don't know whether I trust you or not. But I know that $10 is $10, right? In that sense. So I don't have to trust you unless I think you printed it up in your home office in that sense. Okay. And this trust, we could say, was easy when what people gave you had things that are of intrinsic value, like gold and silver, or things that were scarce, like salt or whatever, because that was commodity, or pork bellies, because that was a commodity value, commodity money. Our historical thing, playing with gold dust. You walk in, you've been in the mines in Placerville, you buy something with gold dust. Probably a lot of merchants who wish they could still do that. Okay. So that's what money is quickly. So still, it's cryptocurrency money. Let's take a break for about 10 minutes.
Are you going to sit there spinning a little bit?
Okay. Okay. So what happened in this case is that governments did get involved. Now, the notion too is that governments got involved because why? Two reasons. They wanted you to pay taxes. And secondly, they had to pay their soldiers. They had to pay their military. Those are what actually economists believe really was the generation, or the genesis, I should say, of money. And it allowed it to be consistent. The government had an identity, as I said. It was portable. It had control over the population. The government had control over the population because it was issuing this currency. It could regulate it, it could define the units, and it could deal with issues such as counterfeiting. Okay. And I already sort of mentioned this, so I'm going to skip that one. Skip these other ones. Now, there are issues with respect to this model that's been around for millennia, in the sense is that what about the loss of control over, say, precious metal supplies? Okay, you run out, you can't have access to precious metals. What are you going to do? Portability. And you say, is money valuable because of its material value, like gold, or because the government says it is? It's what this led to in that case. Fraud, like coin shaving. This goes back to that thing. Why do our coins have little ridges on it? Because people used to, shave the edges of it, and you shave enough of them and you can accumulate some substantial silver or gold or something of that nature. So the question is, maybe because of this, it was time to reconsider. How about a piece of paper? Well, okay. That's what we came up with. All right, now, here we're really gonna, and if you didn't take the other class, you're really gonna think that I've lost it here. Because we're gonna take a trip to the Isle of Yap in the South Pacific. And some of you have seen these pictures like this. This is usually identified as being the world's largest coins. But it's more than that. And I hope you're going to see the parallel that I play here. It's referred to as the Island of Stone Money. And why does it exist? First off, is the Isle of Yap has no metals. It doesn't have anything that could be used as a commodity, like silver or gold or anything of that nature. But what they did do, given that absence, is they took the concept of money from the tangible to the abstract, and we'll see how that. And in the case of Yap, what it says is the perception of ownership is more important than the physical ownership. Because you're not going to take one of those big stones and have it in your house or something of that nature, but the perception of ownership. Now, how is that perception built? It's because what the community says, the community knows about it. You own this stone. It's agreed amongst us that you own this stone. And so it's not a bank saying that, but it's a community. It's the wisdom of the crowd. So it's decentralized. Okay, now, Milton Friedman thought this was just an amazing idea. And he actually wrote this paper about the Island of Stone Money. And asked himself in that way, could this concept of ownership and tracking be applied to a modern society? That's not to say Yap is not modern, but they're certainly not, they would be counted as third world. Could this be applied? And so, what does this mean? How does this work? So, what happens in the case of Yap is that Yap residents go to different islands to get the stone, where the stone is. And they describe that history because they know the history, the provenance of that stone when it got mined. Okay? And could therefore establish its worth. Storage, no one's going to steal it. By displaying it in public places, the community could verify its quality and its features. Exchange and then auditability, virtual history. There's a great story that Friedman talks about the fact that one of these ryes that were brought from another island to Yap, the boat sank. And this thing sunk to the bottom of the ocean. But guess what? It's still real. They know it's there. And they know where it is. And so it still has value. You don't have to have physical possession of it. Yeah, well, that's another question that we saw for this. Yes. So is it money? But you raise up the whole notion for this, and we'll come to that. All right, so that's what the Yap economy is. Now, what does that have to do? Maybe you saw a few things what I was getting to in terms of talking about decentralized money and talking about perception of wealth as opposed to physical wealth and what that means. But what we're used to when we talk about then in terms of things like paper money, we're talking about what is referred to as fiat currency. Fiat means let it be done. And that's what we're seeing now. Currency that does not have any intrinsic value, even though you could say that the rye and Yap doesn't either. But it has value because somebody says it does. And it maintains its value because the people who use it say that it has value. And it requires trust in the agency, mainly like governments. And certainly over the centuries, the global economy appears to have converged on this concept, especially the US dollar. My favorite here, Emperor Norton. Emperor Norton, related to San Francisco, Emperor Norton decides to print his own money, and he could use it. He got people to accept it. Anyway, okay, now, what do you do when you look at money? There's the whole concept too, what you see about micropayments. What does that mean? That means that somebody or the government decides the units. Okay, so what happens when a payment amount is less than the minimum unit of fiat currency? You say, well, isn't this arbitrary? Well, look, anybody remember these guys? You look at this and it says its face value is 1 mil. And mil is a real amount of money. Or you look at this. Why is gas, this is an old slide, $2.59 9/10 per gallon? What the heck does that mean? You know, it's $2.60 a gallon because you can't pay 9/10 of a cent. But why even have that there? Except for make you feel as though you're getting a deal. But it means, so to say, is that one issue with respect to this is the issue of micropayments, okay? Which we're going to come to. How much you can, why do we stop with pennies? Okay? Especially when other countries, it's arbitrary in terms of what the lowest coinage might be. And especially if you try to coordinate with one another, it becomes a ridiculous problem. Okay, so what is money? And this is a summary of the sense. It's a market-born institution. It's a tool of exchange, a material commodity. It's divisible into units. It lasts forever, and I say no. What about the francs that we still have? And, you know, they're totally worthless now, except my grandchildren are ever interested in coin collecting or something of that nature. It depends upon rare scarcity, homogeneous, easily stored, not subject to wide fluctuations, and always in demand. But that's interesting because it's sort of saying that's going to be our popular perception about what money is, because the question is, why do we say things like time is money? What does that mean? Or why do you say things like, in the case of like social media and things, that data is the new currency? What does that mean? It is suggesting that my favorite movies is of value to somebody, but not necessarily to me. Okay. Friedrich Hayek won the Nobel Prize in economics in 1974. He said, "I don't believe we shall ever have good money again before we take the thing out of the hands of government." That is, we can't take them violently out of the hands of government. All we can do is by some sly roundabout way introduce something they can't stop.
But again, did he mean because we went off the gold standard?
That's part of it, yeah. That the government can do whatever it wants to. But do something that they can't change. So, is cryptocurrency money? If so, what kind? What characteristics of money apply? Who is its community? In other words, the people that are going to accept it. What is its connection with fiat currency? Or is it fiat because the community says it? Remember, that's what fiat means. How did it evolve? Is it truly a new form of money? You look at traits of money. So gold, fiat currency, and cryptocurrency. And you take these particular factors. Fungible, that means it is interchangeable, right? Interchangeable in the sense of me knowing, for example, that if I give you $10, a $10 bill, and say, can you give me a 5 and 5 ones? That makes sense, right? Non-consumable, portable, durable, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see by this particular thing, crypto outranks them all. Except government issued, because it isn't. I'm actually out of camera. Sorry about that. Yes, sir.
When you go to a money exchange business, they have the value is always fluctuating.
Yep.
And I'm wondering how in the hell that happens and who decides?
Oh, you mean like it for dollars and stuff, or are you talking about cryptocurrency?
I want to get some pounds in or euros when I go to I want to have euros.
Sure.
Or I want to get traveler's checks and and they go through some calculation.
You want to know who controls the exchange rate?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. That's a perfectly good thing for you to accept, for you to ask that question. But if I told you in the sense that it is controlled by the users, by the crowd, that wouldn't make any sense. But the value, and we're going to see this, when we talk about the volatility of cryptocurrency, who is responsible for the volatility of cryptocurrency? It's not a government. It's the users. It's how people are using it. Okay, So this is Elon Musk in January 2020, before he went crazy. And of course, he was interested in this because he was one of the founders of PayPal. But he says cash these days is being used much rarer. It's increasingly difficult to use cash. Some places you can't use cash. And so that's a forcing function for transactions that are illegal, quasi-legal, in some cases legal. Well, Elon, what else is there besides illegal, quasi-legal, and legal? Is there any other category? I don't know. But it's got to be both legal and illegal. That's weird. Maybe he was starting to lose his mind at that time. But basically, the notion too, in the sense, is that the current financial system is not working in that sense. I believe in honest money, gold and silver, because they are commodities, and Bitcoin. Okay. Okay, so now we define money, we got to define payment systems, right? And so this is whatever system there might be that facilitates financial transactions. Okay? Systems that use fiat currencies do not require in-person cash transactions because things like the Fed. Okay, so if you've got a fiat currency that is controlled by a government, then how would you expect that to be accepted by someone who is not beholding in your government? That's what you're saying, in the sense of who sets the exchange rate between dollars and pounds, or between dollars and euros. Okay. So quickly here, familiar payment systems, stored value, debit cards, checks, money orders, online systems like PayPal and Venmo. Those have came up. Now, I mentioned these in large part because we once again are in recognition of the fact that we're dealing with now a digital society. So wouldn't you expect, in this sense, on a digital society to be able, let's just say, well, credit cards work. Can't we just take this credit card system and lay it on top of the online system? Well, maybe that works sometimes. Okay, then let's use PayPal, or let's use Venmo, that are going to be unique to an online system. Okay. But there's this chain of validation. So, credit cards, look at the process you have to go through. You present the customer, it's got to go validated, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That is not frictionless. Have you ever been to like a merchant and give them your credit card and they say, oh, our system's down right now. You can't pay with Visa because the machine's not working. Okay, there is that path in that sense that you have to be concerned with. Why then, in that case, is there this obstacle if you want to spend money and you can't? They would accept fiat, but they don't want to accept your card. Yes.
A grocery store and pay with Bitcoin, can you?
Some grocery stores you can, absolutely.
Credit card, how do you?
Ta-da! We're going to get to that. Okay, so, and we look back when we talk about this, one of the killer applications of the web was e-commerce, which meant now you could easily go buy a shirt from Hong Kong. You could open a store that was available to anybody in the world. But that didn't get around the problem that, oh, well, one thing if you do it, you order a shirt from Hong Kong and you got to figure out how many US dollars is equal to this number of Hong Kong dollars, because those are the fiat currencies. So it was fun to have this global market, but that didn't solve the money problem. And especially in the sense of saying, you know, you buy something from somebody in Hong Kong, suppose they don't send it to you. How can you prove you paid for it? Or something of that nature. Because those early systems that you saw like Venmo and those, all they were attempting to do was to take the old payment systems, like the ones with credit cards and that validation path, and just lay them on top, repurpose them for the digital society. Okay. And here are the reasons: security and privacy, credit card theft, lack of anonymity. You know, even though contention was that you could have secure transactions like HTTPS, et cetera. Yes, sir.
How do they determine fraud that's being used on the card? They do it almost instantly. Your card's being used with fraud.
Well, right now, because it's being actually cross-referenced to known sources of fraud.
I see.
Especially in the sense, I mean, if you're one that, you know, my wife religiously looks at the credit card bills every time. Did you spend this? You recognize this? And, you know, if you report it, things of that nature. But there's other ways as well. And we'll actually talk about that in terms of dealing with fraud. Anyway, that's the digital payments. And so here's another quote from Milton Friedman. And he says, this is regarding the digital society. The one thing that's missing, but will soon be developed, is reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet, you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A, which was the value when you did it face to face with cash, right? How can you do that on the internet? Yes.
Thing with the current credit card system, A and B know each other. It's digitally, the information.
You think you know who they are.
Well, they know who you are.
Yeah, they know who you are, but you think you know who they are. You know, but in many cases, obviously, they try to trick you. So, for example, if you go to something called Amazon and it happens to have a 0 instead of an O in the name, then that's probably not, you're probably giving them your credit card information and you wish you hadn't. Yes, sir.
How was Friedman thinking that in 1976?
Yes.
Well, first off, is that really, you have to think, was sort of the beginning of the network age. People were talking about networks in that sense, and not just in the sense for personal use, but you know, you had the whole thing with international banking. You had wire transfers. You had all these sort of instruments that were using network technology. But you're right. What was it that prompted this notion with Uncle Milty? Yes.
Do we need it? I mean, unless you're a crook, what's the deal with?
You know, well, being a crook is the extreme example. You know, certainly crooks don't want you to know who they are. But the whole notion too is that why can't you? I mean, I give somebody cash for a pizza and I don't know their names. You know, I don't know who they are. You know, somebody comes to the door with a pizza, maybe I'm not going to question who they are. But that's what anonymity does not have to be a bad thing. But it also means that it offers you some level of protection. Maybe you don't want anybody to know what you're buying. That doesn't mean it has to be bad. Okay? So the challenges for the system like Friedman talked about was trust, anonymity, decentralization, double spending, what does that mean? In the sense is that how frequently is the system updated, in the sense that you can't spend the same money more than once. You can't do that with cash, you know, but you write a check and you know, for example, now that hey, it's going to take a week for that check to clear. So guess what? Maybe I can spend some of that money too that check is for before that check clears. I'm trying to double spend on a fixed amount of money, right? Non-repudiation, what does that mean? Non-repudiation means that if I get a payment, then I know who it came from and I can't contest it. In other words, you pay me online $20 and I come back and I say, how come you haven't paid me? And you say, I did. I said, well, I didn't get it. And you said, I can prove it. I can prove to you that I paid you. That's non-repudiation. Convertibility to and from fiat currency and adoption. Okay. Now, I won't go through all of these, but, you know, we talked about Friedman back at that period of time. There were lots of early attempts at having an electronic cash. And here's some of them. And none of them really seemed to catch on. None of them really seemed to work. And in fact, if you're a real conspiracy theorist, look at this paper in 1996 from the NSA. This is before Bitcoin. The NSA says the cryptography of anonymous electronic cash. The NSA was thinking of that. And if you're a real conspiracy theorist, you might say, well, did Satoshi Nakamoto really work for the NSA? You know? Is it really secure? They know I'm spending my money. But I doubt it. Now, I want to introduce this fun concept here of what were called the cypherpunks. And these were activists in that period of time who thought that strong mathematical cryptography could solve lots of problems, because it certainly solved the idea of security and anonymity, right? And it includes many of the people who were thinking about electronic cash. And so there was a thing in 1993 called the Cypherpunks Manifesto that says privacy is necessary. We cannot expect governments, corporations, or other large faceless organizations to grant us privacy. But we can do it with software, and we can do it with cryptography. So this was a group of activists, techies, geeks, as you were in that particular case. Probably 90% of them were young men in the sense. And their original way of communicating with each other was by means of an electronic mailing list. Okay, in 1992. Now, this brings us forward to the 31st of October, 2008. We were in the middle of one of the worst financial crises in history, you know, in this case. This is basically the whole thing where with Lehman Brothers and all that, you know, that the economy had gotten to the point and the government was bailing out all of these financial institutions, and everything just looked like it was going down the toilet, right? Okay. And on the mailing list a paper was posted called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system on a mailing list. And it claimed to offer an alternative to traditional banking system. Now, one thing interesting to note about this is that under normal circumstances, you would think this might be like an academic peer-reviewed paper. But the mailing list for the cypherpunks was hardly academic and hardly peer-reviewed. And so it didn't go through that channel. And once again, it showed its activity, as it were. And so what it did is it laid out the fundamentals of Bitcoin. Oh, I didn't make the distinction too. Bitcoin with a capital B and Bitcoin with a little b. One of them is the unit of currency, and the other one is the protocol. Bitcoin with the big B is the protocol. Bitcoin with the little b is the currency. Okay. The author was listed as Satoshi Nakamoto, and he had communicated he or she or them, but nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew who it was. And here's the paper. You should read it. Okay. And here's the central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. Once again, bear in mind that that's when you were bailing out all these financial institutions. Banks must be trusted to hold our money and transfer it electronically. But what do? They lend it out, try to make interest, and if that fails, who bites the bullet? You do. Okay. 3rd of January 2009, the first ever cryptocurrency was officially launched. And it was known as the Genesis block. Remember our chain? You got to have a beginning somewhere that you add everything else to. So the very first transaction on the blockchain, on that ledger, is the Genesis block. Okay? And in it, there's all this digital mumbo jumbo. But also in this block was a statement of purpose, because in the documentation associated with this block was a reference to this London Times article about let's have more bailouts for banks. So the message that was coming here is the time for this nonsense is over. Right? So the notion too is that the network, as we saw, is robust because it's simple. Nodes can work by themselves. There's no points of failure. It's distributed, it's peer-to-peer, it's non-centralized. It's impossible to forge or modify. We'll see why that's the case, but that's based on cryptography. It doesn't allow double spending, non-repudiation. It's supported by the power of the crowd. Sounds like the society on Yap. And it's not based on dollars. It's not based on fiat currencies, but is a currency for the digital age that isn't associated with a bank, isn't associated with a government, and exists for the individual. Yes.
So can you have a Bitcoin loan? In that case, you're not getting away from from bubbles and
What?
failures. Well, if the people who borrowed it can't pay it back,
Oh, a Bitcoin loan in a sense, well, you'll see how that actually is possible, especially now when you have such things as smart contracts. We'll see that. But the answer is yes, you can have Bitcoin loans. Okay. Here's a couple of more quotes that I like. Bitcoin adoption could multiply more people who become aware of how they're being treated by banks and governments. And Bitcoin is a declaration of monetary independence. That's pretty heavy. So why were the cypherpunks attracted to Bitcoin? Well, we already know they lost confidence in the banks. They had seen all these bad decisions that were being made by banks and governments. But at the same time, this was when techies, when people who were knowledgeable of the technology were becoming voices and looking for solutions in technology. Maybe it was because of politics. Probably wasn't because of anarchy and greed. I don't think anybody at that stage would have thought about scams with Bitcoin. In the same way that the inventors of the World Wide Web, didn't think about the dark web or scam. They were naive. Yes.
What establishes the value of Bitcoin if it's not based upon hard assets?
We'll get to that. It's the demand. It's the availability. It's scarcity. I'll leave you with a clue on that. We talked about one of the key parts is going to be addressing inflation, right? There will only ever be a fixed number of Bitcoin ever. And you make do with what is there. It's just as though, in the same way, there's a limited amount of gold on the planet. And when that runs out, what do? It becomes more valuable. As opposed to fiat currency that runs out, you just print some more. It's not backed.
The value of Bitcoin is constantly in fluctuation.
That is correct. So is the value of the dollar, but probably for less honorable reasons. That's a personal opinion. Yes.
I have my life savings in Bitcoin.
Don't.
And it fluctuated. That's not very reliable.
Now, that's because in some ways, let me address that before we go. You're going to see, let's go back to FUD. And I talk about the cypherpunks. Bitcoin is a financial system. If you own Bitcoin, you're supposed to use it. You're supposed to spend it. You're not supposed to stash it away. You're supposed to buy stuff with it. You're supposed to receive payments with it. If you choose to speculate on its value, then you're exactly addressing what the cypherpunks didn't want you to do, because that's what happened to the financial system that they recognized. Okay? If you've got it, you go buy a sandwich with it. And you don't think about the fact, you might think about the fact, well, okay, if it goes up, I just paid $50 for a grilled cheese sandwich. Or if it goes down, I just paid 75 cents for a grilled cheese sandwich. Okay, that's fine, but you spend it. You're not supposed to speculate. So you don't put your life savings in it. Okay. The financial system, crypto's the Trojan horse. wanting to get in. In the case of Troy and the Greeks, it wanted to get in and wreak havoc, not necessarily make change in that case. Now some of you might follow Lex Friedman, his podcast. Excellent guy, smart guy, you know, in terms of technology. And it's not just because he said this that I like him. Satoshi Nakamoto should be awarded the Nobel Prize in economics. But that's impossible.
Yes.
You can't give a Nobel Prize to somebody you don't know who they are. Okay. But he has been successful in making people rethink, as it were, this. My message for today, though, is ignore FUD. Any questions? Comments? Everything went right on time. Yes, sir.
Right, well, I'm gonna go back to the simple
Setting foundation.
fundamental purpose
And
of
understanding what's going
money. One of them is to make investments, store money up.
Yeah.
Like loan it out.
Yeah.
Someone who makes an investment and that investment might fail. I mean, they won't get your money back, and that's true of any currency.
Well, let me tell you, let me address one thing here. And this, I think, addresses what you're asking. On one of my first slides, I said, do you think that cryptocurrency is a scam or a pyramid scheme? Right? Okay. You buy crypto and the value of crypto goes down, right?
Well, ultimately.
Or the value of crypto goes up. Let me finish. The value of crypto goes up. That's not coming out of somebody else's pocket.
Ultimately, where this is leading is there will only be crypto. The fiat currency will go away.
No, that's not, you know, maybe that was a thought at the very beginning, but I have a feeling that was sort of like the idea, because this is the same period of time where people were thinking about Esperanto. Let's only have one language. How stupid an idea was that? No. I don't think anybody now really thinks that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are going to take over the world. But what they might be thinking, including the US government, is that there is a place for digital currency in government financial systems. Right? Not going to do away with the dollar, but there may well be a digital dollar that is based upon the same technological foundations as cryptocurrencies. Does that make sense?
Understand it. A lot of what you said before the beginning about, trust and avoiding getting governments out of the picture and so on would indicate that ultimately the idea is to just have.
Well, that might have been what at the very beginning, but now, of course, no, I'm not sure that anybody really believes that now. Excuse me. Yes.
Isn't the current value of crypto in essence based upon voodoo circumstances?
Well, Uncle Milty was known for voodoo economics, wasn't he? As it were. I don't know exactly what you mean by voodoo circumstances. I think that what you're seeing in the case too, it's like the price of gold. What determines the price of gold? Demand. Okay. That's what determines the value of gold. So the value of crypto, in a similar way, is going to be based on demand. The value of the dollar is not based on demand.
But the value of gold, in essence, is based upon something that you can handle, you can weigh, it's a tangible object. What is the value of
Well, see, that's the big mindset that you go away, excuse me. That you had to get away from, is the fact is that is something that is only a sequence of bits. Can you really say that it and exists only on, you know, silicon on your computer or your phone? Is that something as tangible as something you can hold in your hand? And that's, you know, that's basically a mindset that sort of has to change. Maybe that's part of the faith, or maybe that's once again, you know, what has happened in terms of, you know, our understandings of perceptions. In the same way that, you know, the other things that have sort of changed the way people think because of the digital age. You know, now you can do business with somebody and never meet them. You know, never come see them face to face. And all those things are possible because of technology. Does that make sense? And even technology can betray you in the sense now too. I think about this because one of the other things I teach is artificial intelligence, is the whole thing about fakes, you know, digital fakes and video fakes. So even then, can you really believe what you see? Because it's nothing but zeros and ones. So if you can't trust a photo that you see that's digital, why should I try to convince you that you can trust a unit of value that's digital? Does that make sense? Yes.
Aren't we creating cryptocurrency? I mean, where did it come from?
It comes from, well, you know what? I'm not going to go through the mining process right now. We will. But there's a good analogy there. Why is it called, so long, see you next week. Why is it called mining? Because effectively someone has to do work in order to get it. In the same way that your 49ers, in this case, they had to dig, risk their lives or whatever to come up with that goal. And that goal, in some ways, value reflected the amount of work and the amount of effort that they did to obtain it. That's why it's called mining in this sense to it. Right? Yes, sir.
Ever heard Lynn Alden?
Pardon?
Lynn Alden, you've ever heard of her?
Yeah.
She's got a.
Broken money. There's a good title. What do you think that means? Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. Yes. All righty. Next week. Yes, sir. It's good to see you. So you're going to join us walking?
What time?
Incidentally, I might add too, is that I traditionally do not walk on days that I teach, so I didn't walk today. Do you know Bill Shepherd, who was right here? No, I don't think so. He,
Walker?
yeah.